"I am Jesus. I will tell you a parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father,
'Father, give me my share of the money.'
So the father divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son gathered all he had and journeyed to a distant land, where he wasted his wealth in extravagant living. He threw lavish parties, bought expensive clothes, and dined at the finest establishments. Every day seemed like a new adventure, filled with excitement and pleasure, yet beneath the surface a shadow of emptiness grew. As weeks turned into months, the young man's spending continued unchecked. He surrounded himself with friends who encouraged his lavish lifestyle, and together, they squandered money on frivolous pursuits. He bought the latest gadgets, took spontaneous trips, and indulged in the finest foods and wines. The allure of wealth and freedom from responsibility was intoxicating, but the more he pursued pleasure, the more hollow he felt inside. But then misfortune struck. A severe famine swept through the land, leaving devastation in its wake. Prices soared, jobs vanished, and the young man's extravagant lifestyle quickly became unsustainable. With his funds depleted and no means of support, he faced a harsh reality. Desperate for work, he accepted any job he could find, eventually finding himself feeding pigs, a humiliating task for someone who had once lived in luxury. In his hunger, he eyed the pods the pigs were eating, but no one offered him anything to satisfy his gnawing hunger. The contrast between his former life of privilege and his current plight could not have been more stark. Alone in the filth and stench of the pigsty, he hit rock bottom. It was then that he came to his senses.
How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death?
He thought of his father's house, the warmth of home and the security he had once taken for granted. With tears streaming down his face, he made a decision.
I'll set out and go back to my father. I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'
So he gathered what little strength he had left and began the long journey home. Meanwhile, the father had never stopped watching and waiting. Every day he looked out from the porch, hoping against hope to see his lost son return. And one day, far in the distance, he saw a familiar figure stumbling down the road. It was his son. Filled with compassion, the father ran to meet him. He threw his arms around his son and kissed him, ignoring the dirt and stench that clung to him. The son began his rehearsed speech.
"Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son."
But the father wouldn't hear of it. He called to his servants.
"Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. Before he was lost, and now he is found."
And so the celebration began, joyous and overflowing. Meanwhile, the older son had been working in the fields, dutifully tending to his father's land. As he approached the house that evening, he heard music and laughter. Confused, he called one of the servants and asked him what was happening.
"Your brother has come home,
The servant replied eagerly.
and your father has thrown a feast to celebrate his return."
The older son's heart sank. Anger boiled within him. All these years he had stayed loyal to his father, working tirelessly without complaint. He had never disobeyed his father's orders, never strayed from the path of duty, and yet he had never been rewarded with a celebration. Furious, he refused to join the festivities. His father, sensing his son's bitterness, came out to plead with him.
"My son,
He said gently,
you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found."
The older son stood silent, torn between his sense of justice and the overwhelming love his father showed to his wayward brother. In that moment, he faced a choice: to cling to his resentment or to embrace the same boundless love and forgiveness that had welcomed his younger brother home.
And the parable ended, leaving those who heard it to ponder the depths of a father's love, the pain of betrayal, and the hope of redemption.